If you are looking to get your podcast featured or your expertise featured in more media outlets, but you're not really sure how to position yourself in a way that makes sense or how to get started, this episode is definitely for you. This week, Leah is sharing all about how you can take your message, take your story, and really make the most of it and set yourself apart in your industry, which can be very difficult. But she gives us some very strategic ways that we can go about doing that. And then some very easy, quick win ways to not only create more content, but create a digital footprint that really showcases your expertise. Please join me in welcoming Leah to the podcast. Hello, I'm so excited to have you on today, Leah. If you could start by telling everyone who you are, what you do, and about your podcast.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Alicia. So I'm Leah Forney. Hey, everybody. I am known as the Visibility Activator, and that is my cute little way of telling people that I strategize and teach women mainly how to use their stories to get into the media. And so I was a first-time author trying to figure out how to get my name and my book and my message out there to the world. And so I stumbled on media, taught myself how to pitch, and now I teach women how to do the same thing I did without having to spend thousands of dollars on a publicist. No shade to publicists, but you can do it without a publicist.
And I know authors, right? They tend to not have a lot of money to, get into media or to try to do that. And specifically thinking about podcasters, what are some ways that are maybe out of the box? Maybe we don't have a book yet, or we are just trying to find other ways to get our message out there, people being aware of our podcast. What are some things that we can maybe start thinking about?
Yeah, so I'm like a big, huge fan of other people's platforms. Like, I tell any podcaster, any author, any entrepreneur, like, you should run your mouth about who you are, what you do, your expertise on other people's platforms. Like, find every type of media outlet you can that like looks for experts like you, and then pitch yourself to them and run your mouth. Like, talk about your expertise, talk about the work that you do, share about any books or any other things that you have that's currently out. But I'm like a huge fan of like other people's platforms. Like, run your mouth, because my thing is that's how you reach a larger audience. Like, you can only say so much on like your social media, but then when you start getting on other people's stuff and then they start sharing it, like that's just kind of how you begin to go viral and people get to know who you really are.
Yeah. I saw someone post on Threads, I want to say it was this morning, and they were talking about how the new Bad Boys movie came out and how these have been movies that have been being made for the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And they're like well-known actors, and they still went out and did media coverage, and they still went out and promoted the movie, and they still went out and talked about it. And I was like, yes. So often we're like, oh, I told them or I said something about it. It's like, but did they hear? Really? Do they know that you have new stuff? Do they know about what you're doing right now? Probably not, because everybody's worried about themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. Like, some people think that they need to make like one post and like the whole entire world just saw it. And I'm like, there's this beautiful thing called algorithms, and sometimes it works in your favor and sometimes it doesn't work in your favor. And so you can't just make one post. Like, statistically, we know that it takes an average person to see something 7 times before they're like, oh, let me click on that. Right? So like, to your point about the Bad Boys movie, they were promoting it heavily for the average person to then be like, oh, there's a Bad Boys movie coming out. Let me go check that out, right? And so that's how they were able to like hit their box office goals and surpass their goals, because promotion still is the thing. Like, I always tell people, word of mouth is still the thing. The traditional way of doing business still works. Like, yes, we are online, but there are people that still send out flyers, still send out postcards, still do e-blasts, still get on the radio and promote. Like, they are still doing the traditional way of doing business. And so you should do the same thing.
Yes. 63%, according to the most recent stats, 63% of people who were polled said that they trust what their favorite podcast hosts are saying about products and people that they like and people that they want to do business with. That's a big deal. And I don't think people realize that. Like sit on that for a second. And then adding in the fact that 7 times, we had someone on recently where they talked about this, 7 times note was from like the 20s, 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And so like you're adding in technology, you're adding in the fact that everybody's attention span has reduced dramatically. How many more times do you need to be actually seen in order for your message to land?
A whole lot. It's probably way more to that. And to like your point of like 63%, tack that onto statistics that say that most people will purchase from people with positive media coverage. So like I always tell people and clients that have worked with me, like people are going to Google you. The media is going to Google you. Like if you're reaching out to the media to get it featured, you think they're not going to go check you out? Like they need to know that you're a credible source. So they're going to go looking. And if they go looking at your digital footprint and there's nothing that aligns with who you say you are, you're going to get passed over. And so that's why I always tell people, like, if you're going to use social media, use it the right way. Be intentional about what you're posting. Make sure that you're putting out content that positions you as the expert. Because when the media goes looking, then they're like, oh, Alicia really does know what she's talking about. Let's interview her. But if you're like posting pictures and talk about kittens and sewing and all these things that don't align with what you say your expertise is, then they're going to be like, yeah, I'll pass.
Yes. So what I'm hearing is you can't just be like, oh, I got an idea. Let's do this. You got to kind of put some intention behind it, create the content, either whether that's through a podcast, guesting on other people's podcasts, all that stuff shows up on Google. It is so easy to find podcast episodes and to find ones that are featuring someone specifically to hear more about their message and more about what they talk about. And then you add in the fact that they're now adding in transcripts. These people can review this information so much faster. And so you got to make sure that when, like to your point, when you're talking about it, that you're clear. Like, for example, I have been on at least 100 podcasts over the years as a guest. I have been able to, for the majority of those, I talk about podcasting. A very small percentage, I talk about my journey of my story of like growing up in a cult. And then an even smaller percentage, I talk about how much I love reading books. Like, I don't want to be known as the girl who loves to read books. Yeah, everybody loves to read books and I could talk about it forever. But that's not what I want to be known for. That's not what I want people to come to my business for. I want them to come to my business because they're like, oh, I need help with my podcast. Cool. Let me go to her because she knows what she's talking about. So like you said, you got to be strategic. What are some ways that maybe this ties into the like pulling your story in that you mentioned at the beginning, being able to be unique in your industry, right? Because so like there are tons of other people talking about podcasting. So what are some ways that we can, maybe it's journaling or it's reflection to like really get clear on, right, here's how I can kind of position myself different than other people in the industry that also can attract media attention?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is really finding out what's missing, right? Like, what's the missing link? What's the missing gap? What are people not talking about that you have an expertise in? And then how can you take it and bring it into that industry? Because the truth of the matter is, like, regardless of your industry, everybody ain't talking about everything, right? Like, there are some people, like you said, there's tons of podcasters, and there are people that probably just started podcasts that's like, now I'm an expert in podcasting, right? Like, there's tons of them out there. But what's missing, right? So, like, when I was in the podcasting space, I did a lot of conversations about using your podcast to get into the media, or the reason why we need more women-hosted podcasts, right? Because nobody was talking about it. Like, we're talking about a male-dominated industry, right? But we need more female voices. So like when people would come to me about helping their podcast, I only work specifically with women because that was the missing link. So I always tell people, like, figure out what's missing from your industry. And then how can you show up in that space and kind of begin to dominate and be that voice in that industry? The other thing is, what makes you unique? How are you different from your competitors, right? Like, what part of your story is different than anybody else's story? And then how do you take that uniqueness and tell a story in a way that's going to resonate, right? So like when I first started out getting media attention, I was the first time author who wrote a book about my love-hate relationship with my mom, who was an addict, and the complex mother-daughter issues that so many women deal with, right? I wrote the book thinking like, oh, it's just Leah's story. I put it out and so many women was like, oh my God, you just told my story. Like I thought I was the only person that struggled with loving the woman that gave me life, but also was despising her all at the same time. Right. And so I used that. That was my uniqueness. I used that. And so a lot of my first media attentions was me telling that story about that journey of like loving the same person that at the same time you're like, I really can't stand you and you should go somewhere. And how I had to navigate that. So we all have uniqueness in our stories that we can use to tell the story, but also tell it in a way that really like resonates and connects with other people.
Let's sit on that for a second. Okay, like for real. Because as you're telling your story, I'm like, yeah, oldest daughter to an addict. She was an addict for the majority of her life, the majority of my life. The oldest of 5. There's like yes, you love her and you
Oldest of 6.
Yep. Yeah, like I'm over here raising my hand for the people that can't see me. Like this is what connects us. And if you don't let yourself share those stories or share those unique things about you, and granted, they don't have to be traumatic. It could literally just be your opinion on something and you stand on that opinion. But when you share that, there's going to be someone that says, me too.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of podcasting and bringing our stories to life and being able to share our experiences. It allows us to do it in a way that's very different, but also evokes emotion. Because if you just wrote that story, sure, it might make someone feel something. But when you tell it with the reflection, with the feeling, that translates a lot to people. And I don't think people realize how powerful voice is because of that. And so using your voice to be able to express that, that's going to connect you not only with potential clients, but allow the media to see, oh, maybe we do need to have her on camera. We don't need just a guest blog post from her or a virtual interview or a blog interview. We need her on camera. We need her voice.
Yeah.
That is so powerful.
Yeah. There's power in storytelling. And I think that, again, it's a very basic skill that every entrepreneur needs to like literally master is how do you tell your story and tell it in a way that connects with people? Because here's the thing. Everybody wants to be able to self-identify. Like when we watch movies, when we listen to music, when we read books, we're looking for something in all of that that we could be like, oh my God, that's me. I thought I was if you've ever listened to an album, like you've probably got one album that you know frontwards and backwards. Why? Because something about that music you connect to, you resonate with. It's the same thing with telling our stories. Like you just have to learn how to master telling it in a way where someone can be like, wait a minute, this person is talking about me. Or, like I used to tell people like when I would go to church and the pastor's preaching a sermon, you like, first of all, why are you in my business? Like, where was you when I was having that like, that's what you want. Like, you want people to be like, hold up, where was you at when I was just having that conversation? Because it almost feels like you were in their business, but really it's your experience. It's what you've lived through. And you're just telling that story in a way that lets them know that like, you're not alone on this journey.
Oh, yes. And what better way to do that than with our voice, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious too, when someone is maybe they're an entrepreneur and they're a podcaster, but we see this a lot, especially with our clients, where they're more likely to do guest episodes, like have guests on their show because it's more comfortable, right? To have not talk out into the void, to talk to someone, have that instant reflection and feedback. But they're hesitant to do solo episodes, or they're hesitant to really show themselves in like a vulnerable way. What are your tips for that?
I definitely say do solo episodes. Like when I started Hey Queen Thrive, we're going on 4 years in January. I did it with like most of us. Oh, I'm just going to invite a whole bunch of people and we're going to have these amazing conversations. And it was great. And it's been great for the 4 seasons we've done it. But I started testing out solo episodes because the thing is, you want to be seen as the expert. And so what most people don't realize is that when you have guests, you're really shining the spotlight on the guests and less about you. And so you can have like this amazing product, this amazing service, even this amazing community. Maybe you just have a Facebook community and nobody will ever know because you're not taking the time to just like talk about you, talk about your journey, and bring people into your world as the expert. And so I tell every podcaster, definitely have some solo episodes, like really plan it out, give people some insight into who you are, what your journey has been about, why you started the show, like really tell people the story because experts are great. I love them. You just don't need 70-80% of your content to be that. And I know that now as someone who's done it. So now it's kind of the reverse where 70-80% of the content is Leah. And then I trickle in a few guests here and there. So definitely you need some solo episodes.
I'm nodding my head like, yeah, because I think it's so important. And to your point, no one's going to know what you do. And I'd also like to challenge everyone. If you're listening to this and you mostly have guest episodes, throw in a solo episode and see how it does. Like, get the emotion out of it. Look at the data. What does it tell you? Because I would bet money, and I don't bet money, but I would bet money that your solo episodes outperform your guest episodes because they can hear that guest anywhere else. They're there for you. They're there for your voice, for the way that you are, not the guest, because guest changes. They're still there for you. So that's my challenge for listeners. Like, do the thing.
That's a good challenge. It is. And you're absolutely right. Because I think the first time I tried this solo episode was maybe season 2 of my show. And it was like literally my last episode of the season. And like to this day, it's still like in my top 10 episodes. Like when I put it out, and it was just about the power of pivoting. I don't know what was happening in the world at the time, but clearly everybody was on a pivot. And like that episode ended up having like 3,000 plus downloads because people were just like, oh my God, and I'm just like, I was just sharing what I was experiencing at that moment. But you're right. And solo episodes really help you to begin to identify your tribe and your people and the people that tune in every week or every other week, however often you're releasing episodes. So they know like, oh, this is a space for me and my people, right? Like my tribe is my Thrive tribe. I say hey to them every episode. I'm like, what's good, Thrive tribe? What we up to? And that's my community. And you better believe that every Thursday they're like, yep, new episode of Hey Queen Thrive. Let's go check it out. So they need to hear your voice. They really do.
Yeah. And there's so many different ways to do it, right? So that's like one of the recurring themes in this show is that there's no one right way to podcast. There's no one right way to grow your show or to generate leads. And so in this case, I found I was having such fun having conversations with people, but I didn't want to increase the number of episodes that would go live a week with this show. And so I changed this show to be specifically guest focused with that theme in mind of, all right, there's no one way. Let's showcase that there's no one way or one right way to do this. And then I created a 10 minutes or less solo show that is SEO heavy, that has all the full blog posts and the full video and all of that stuff where I can still show up as the expert and direct people for, okay, you want Alicia? Here you go. So I had someone reach out recently. They were like, I listened to your show. Absolutely love it. Your solo episodes are my favorite. And I was like, well, I don't know if you knew, but I moved my solo episodes over there. You can get all Alicia episodes if you follow that podcast. And they had no idea that I had launched the other one. I launched that one in January. So it's been a few months of me talking about it and they'd been following me and didn't even realize. So you got to repeat yourself. You got to keep telling people and have those solo episodes. So what are some things that we can do? All right, we've got our content. We are not afraid to share our story. We're not afraid to share our message. What do we do next to start kind of dabbling into getting ourselves in media?
Yeah. So I always tell people research and make a list of every media outlet that is looking for experts in your industry, right? It's going to be very important that you find media sources that align with your expertise, right? So like if you're good at AI, you should probably be on every platform that's talking about AI. Don't be on Home and Garden because that has nothing to do with AI, right? And I say that because when I first started out, I was that rambunctious, like first time author. I'm like, I want everybody's stuff. Let's do everybody's stuff. And then I started understanding SEO and the importance of being, and it was just like, yeah, that probably wasn't a good move because they're gonna go hear you on this podcast that has nothing to do with what you're talking about, right? So definitely make a list, curate your list of podcasters, radio shows, blogs, magazines that you can be featured in and even write for. Like there's plenty of online magazines that you can write for. And that's even good too when it comes to media. I always tell people three types of media you should absolutely have. You need to have earned media, right? Which is that media that like you earn. Someone says, hey, come be on my show and let's have a conversation, right? You definitely need to have own media. So having a podcast, to all my entrepreneurs, you should have your own show. It helps you as the expert, right? And then there's paid media. Yes, there is such thing as paid media. Like you should pay to be in somebody's stuff. I'm not saying you should pay and to be in everybody's stuff, but pick those things that may require you to have to pay a little bit to be in it, as long as it aligns with what it is that you do, right? So you want to have a really good media mix. And that starts with curating that list of just who are those people that I can reach out with. The other thing I would say is start with who you know. Like at this point in 2024, everybody knows somebody with a podcast. Everybody. A YouTube channel, a blog, like everybody. So start with who you know, right? That's what I did. Literally, my very first 5 interviews ever as an author came from other authors. I happened to be in a community with other authors who were trying to get their name out there. And so we would just like refer each other. And then I started learning how to pitch. And then I started pitching myself. But it started with who I knew and curating that list of people that are looking for people like me.
Yes. So what I'm hearing is you don't have to be everywhere. You have to be really strategic, right? We've seen clients do this really well and also not so well. There was this guy a couple years back. He wasn't a client, but he was trying to be on like 100 podcasts in 1 year. And when you think about that, cool, that's a really cool experiment for him to do. As a business owner, I would never do that when I don't have the mental capacity to be shown up that many times. Also, also, how much quality content does that really create? Or would 12 really intentional, impactful, deep conversations go just as far?
Yeah.
And also, you wouldn't have to spend so much time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I always tell podcasters, like, set realistic goals in terms of media coverage, right? Like, for me, I started out doing 1 to 3 a month. Like, that was my capacity. It was like 1 to 3 a month. I probably do like 2 to 5 now, but starting out, it was 1 to 3 because I just was like, all right, I want to be very intentional about the space I show up in, how I show up, and like my expertise. And the other thing I would say too is it's okay if you are not 100% sure in your expertise. Like I've been an entrepreneur for 7 years. I've probably pivoted at least 3, 4 times. Like I started off as an author, then I was like, I'm a clarity coach, then I'm a book writing like I've pivoted so many times, right? Because you're still trying to figure this thing out. Like, what do I really want to be known for? So it's okay if like your expertise has changed over the years. Like I can go back to old interviews and I could be like, oh man, I remember when I was teaching about purpose-driven life. Like that's not me anymore, right? But that was my expertise at the time. So like whatever your expertise is at the time, use that. And then if you pivot and you go in a different direction, then you can speak to that. Because as real entrepreneurs and business owners, pivoting is a part of the process. Like how you start on day 1 is not going to be where you at 7 years later.
Yes. As someone who's also been in the online space, I'm going on 9 years. And I agree. I've pivoted so many times. It only took this full time because COVID and getting laid off. Like that is it. Otherwise, you would see me at my 9 to 5 happily working away and having a little side hustle. So like, it's so true. You never really know what's going to happen or where your entrepreneurial journey is going to take you. And I agree. Use podcasting, use guest interviews to figure out what it is that you want to say, because otherwise, especially with podcasting, it takes time, effort, money. By going and being on someone else's podcast, you not only are able to generate content for yourself, but take that transcript, run it through an AI service, say, what are 5 or 10 posts that I can create based on the questions asked in this interview?
Yeah.
Boom. There you go. There's your social content, your expertise. Find out what it is that your audience even really wants to know by being a guest and hearing what they're asking. What are those questions that they have for you based on what you say your expertise is? Like
Yeah.
that, those are things that are going to help you stand out, but also create content. And you can take that just from one interview. So I cannot preach that enough to people. Like, get out there, get your name out there, and just try and have fun
Yes,
with it,
ma'am.
right? Like, it doesn't have to be so checklist boxes
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah,
thing. Like,
yeah.
it can be something that you have fun with.
Yeah, definitely. I always tell people get out of your head. Like just be you because it's when you show up as you and you're authentic, again, you're going to find your people. And when you find your people, that's when you can really get into the nitty-gritty of media because you'll then start to see, well, what are they listening to? Where are they showing up, right? Like that's the other thing I teach in the media space is like when you're looking for that or creating your list, ask the people that you're targeting, like, what podcast are you listening to, right? Some people might be in a lot of self-improvement space or personal development space. Cool. So now I need to know, I need to go find every podcast in personal development or self-help, right? Right now that are looking for people like me and then go talk to and be on their show because I know my people, that's what they're listening to right now. So like there's so many ways that you can really grow your digital footprint, get your name out there. But like you said, have fun with it. And here's the thing that I always tell people about podcasting it prepares you to be media ready. I was on tons of shows before my name ever hit USA Today, before I ever made the national news, like tons of shows. So, podcasting, the blogs, the little YouTube shows, the live cast that people are doing, all of those things lead to the big media. And that's what I tell people. Like, people are like, I want to be on Forbes. You know how you get to Forbes? Be on Alicia's podcast. And people think it's crazy when I say that. I'm like, seriously, because guess what Forbes is going to do when you pitch their editor? They're going to Google you. They're
Mm-hmm.
going to go research your digital footprint. They're going to see, have you been on other people's shows? If you have, what have you been talking about? Have you talked about the thing that you say you're an expert in? Right?
Yeah.
They're going to go look at your social medias. Does your content align with what you say you're an expert in? That's how you get to Forbes. That's how you get to Essence. So I always tell people, like, do not despise the smaller podcasters or the small blogs or the small magazines because all of those are SEO friendly and they're going to help you get to the big name.
Yes. I love what you said about asking people, right?
Mhm.
So if you're on someone's podcast, say, hey, do you know, could you connect me with anyone? After the
Yep.
conversation, they've heard your expertise. Podcasters know podcasters. We
Yep.
know other people in this space.
Yep.
We've got lots of friends. And so just saying, hey, I would love to be connected with another podcaster that talks about, is in this category or talks about this topic or who would benefit. Would you mind making a connection? And also reciprocity. Are you looking for anyone that I can make a connection with? That is such a genuine way that I don't see enough people doing at the end of podcast interviews. Like you're out of the recording, you're in the post green room,
Yeah.
maybe talking about your kids or talking about something that was funny during the recording. Say, hey, are you looking for any support? Is there any way that I can connect you with someone that I know? Are you looking for anyone? Cool. Is there anyone that you know? This is what I'm looking to do in the next 6 months. Do you know anyone in this space? There's nothing wrong with doing that. Put yourself out there. Stop, get out of your own head, like you said.
Get out of your own. Yeah, no, seriously. I think that is the easiest way to really grow your show is referrals and word of mouth. I love doing that. Like I love when I've been interviewed by a fellow podcaster because soon as I'm done, I'm like, okay, so what do you need help with? I know tons of people. I got experts in this area, this area, this area, this area. Like one of my really good friends is a podcaster who's also a licensed therapist and has a whole show about relationships. I was like, oh, I know the perfect guest for you. She's a sex therapist. Got them connected. They did an incredible episode. Like, that's what you do. That's how you grow and help each other grow is by really like being like, how can I help you? And promote people's episodes. Like, I never understand how people will be like, I want to be on your show. but then don't want to promote. Like, first of all, promotion works two ways because it promotes my show, but it also promotes you.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a whole other topic, Alicia. We can talk about that.
I know. Forever. Yes. And like, I think too, as hosts, we always can do better of like giving them the assets they need, make it literally a copy and paste kind of thing where it's easy for them to share. But to your point, if you're on a show and someone let you know, hey, your episode is live, share it. It literally, and I did this recently because I didn't like the show notes. I literally took the transcript, put it into my transcription service and said, I need you to write 2 examples of social copy from Alicia, because it can see who's me, based on this conversation. And it did. And I was able to take both, tweak them a little bit, figure out how I wanted to talk about it, and then put it on Instagram and LinkedIn. Done.
Yeah.
It doesn't take that much effort or time. Like, literally make AI do it. It's okay.
Listen, AI is your friend. Use it.
Yes, you're an unpaid intern, I like to say.
Oh, that's a good one. I'm gonna have to use that. My unpaid intern, because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. You don't trust it as far as you can throw it to like write for you, but it gets there almost. You just got to tweak it. Fine. But yes, so good. Leah, this has been so fun. We've talked through all these things and strategies that people can utilize to make sure they're getting into media, get over themselves, get out of their own heads, get on podcasts, and be able to get that digital footprint going how they need to be getting it to. But if anyone's interested in getting to know you, where you're hanging out, your podcast, or if they're like, look, I need some help, where can people go to find you?
Yeah, I'm on all social media platforms as Leah Forney, so you can definitely find me on social media. I always tell people if you want to work with me, shoot me an email at info@leahmforney.com. Say you heard me on Alicia's podcast, I might give you a discount or something. And definitely check out the website, www.leahmforney.com. Hey Queen Thrive is literally on every podcasting platform you can think of. So we're on Spotify, we're on Apple, iHeartRadio, Pandora, you name it, we're there. New episodes air every Thursday. So definitely check us out.
Yes. And we'll make sure we have those linked in the show notes for anyone who is doing other things that needs to go back to those. Leah, thank you so much. This has been so fun.
Thank you for having me.